Greetings again everyone, and welcome to another lens review thing. The first ever professional camera lens I ever bought was an old Canon 70-200mm f4L lens, and ever since then I've had a soft spot for that particular kind of telephoto zoom. They are like their popular 70-200mm f2.8 cousins, only much smaller, lighter and less expensive. They tend to have splendid image quality, a useful zoom range, and the ability to get decently out of focus backgrounds, although obviously not to the same extent as a brighter lens. They're useful for some telephoto landscape photography as well as basic portrait, event and journalistic photography. A while later, I tested Sony's equivalent 70-200mm f4, originally released in 2014, and that was great fun too. An early lens in the Sony lineup, which has class for sure, although it's getting a little old nowadays. Well, technology marches on, and Sony are updating that older lens to have a whole bunch of new features and, according to them, image quality improvements. So let's put the new Sony FE 70-200mm f4 G OSS Mark II through its paces. It's going to hit the market soon at a price of €2,000, or probably around $2,000 US, or £1,750 here in the UK, which is a high price for a lens of this type for sure. It had better be good. I'd like to thank Sony UK for loaning me a copy of the lens for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. The first difference from the original lens comes in this thing's much smaller size. It zooms externally, something I like to see as the lens resultantly contracts and can look less conspicuous and uses less room in your camera bag. The only drawback is that lenses which zoom internally tend to pick up less dust on the inside over time, although having said that, this new lens appears to be well weather sealed, including a gasket at the rear mount. The front glass element of the lens is also fluorine coated for extra dust and moisture resistance, and when shooting in a wet or humid environment, that can be a lifesaver. The lens also allows the use of 1.4 times and 2 times teleconverters, giving you extra reach and extra magnification for shooting smaller subjects, although the base lens itself features a fantastic maximum magnification of 0.5 times, a wonderful macro ability. More on that a little later. The lens has plenty of controls on the side for focusing and optical stabilization, as you can see. Let's see that stabilization at work. Here's some footage with it turned off and now turned on. As you can see, it's doing a lovely job there, even at 200mm, although there's still a gentle waviness to your footage. It works silently and with 3 different modes: general use in mode 1, panning in mode 2, and engaging only when you press the shutter in mode 3. The lens has a heavy-duty tripod mount, which is easy to adjust and even remove altogether. Then we get the rubberized zoom ring. It turns very nice and smoothly, with a touch of heaviness to it, useful for video work, although lenses which zoom internally can work much smoother. Then we get an also rubberized focus ring. It too turns very smoothly and works with the lens's focus motor very responsively. It can work in a linear way for video making, and full-time manual focus is also an option on this lens. When it comes to focus breathing, when zoomed in, we see almost none at all, although zoom out and a little can be spotted. Don't forget though, video makers, that Sony's latest cameras can correct for that. The lens's autofocus motor is, well, it's basically instantaneous. It simply doesn't get any faster than this, and I found autofocus tracking on animals and people to work perfectly also. It's also silent and accurate, and unlike the original lens, it supports autofocus tracking while zooming the lens in and out, which can be useful for sports photography. If you have a fast enough camera, then this lens is also compatible with Sony's 30 frames per second shooting feature without viewfinder blackout, whereas the original lens can only allow 15 frames per second on those kind of cameras for whatever reason. The lens is fairly lightweight at 794 grams or under 2 pounds, and it's made of heavy-duty plastic rather than metal, which is just the norm nowadays and helps keep its weight down. It comes with a nice quality, flocked, deep plastic lens hood. All in all, if Sony set out to make the 170-200mm lens to rule them all, then they've sure succeeded. This is probably the best built and featured telephoto zoom lens I've ever handled, I think, while still being compact and lightweight, although one possible omission might be an aperture ring for video makers. Then again, on a lens whose aperture only starts at f4, I don't think many people will seriously miss it. Alright, let's take a look at image quality, starting on my full frame camera, a 42MP Sony a7R III. Inner camera corrections are turned on for this test. No matter what focal length you shoot at, this lens is always razor sharp at f4 in the middle of your images with excellent contrast, like crazy razor sharp. So let's look in the corners. At 70mm, there's just a touch less sharpness and contrast there, but they're still absolutely brilliant. Stop down to f5.6 and a little extra edge of resolution and contrast return. Zoom in halfway to 135mm and those corners look virtually perfect straight from f4 though, with slightly higher contrast than at 70mm. Zoom in all the way to 200mm and, well, if it's possible, they look even better straight from f4. Across the zoom range, this lens tased this sharp down to about f16, where a little softness begins to creep in due to the effect of diffraction. Still though, what an amazing and consistent performance here, especially when you remember that a 42MP sensor is no joke for even the sharpest lenses. Okay, let's test it on an aps-c camera now, my little 24MP Sony a5100. Again, across the entire zoom range, the lens is always razor sharp in the middle of your images. Over in the corners, the image quality is always great at f4 and perfect when stopped down to f5.6, and that's whether you're shooting at 70mm or all the way into 200mm. So again, you really can't get much better than that. I checked my old test charts and Sony's original lens from 2014 is pretty much as sharp as this at wider angles and in the middle of the zoom range, but zoomed into 200mm, this new lens is considerably better, particularly in the image corners, and it's generally noticeably sharper when used on an aps-c camera too. Okay, let's turn off those in-camera corrections and take a look at the distortion and vignetting, visible in uncorrected RAW files. At 70mm and f4, we see moderately strong pincushion distortion with strong vignetting in the image corners. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 and those corners brighten up. Zoom into 200mm and those problems get even worse, as you can see. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 and thankfully that vignetting clears up. So the lens is 100% intended to be used with corrections, as you can see, so keep them firmly turned on. As I mentioned before, a great new feature of this lens is its half-life-size maximum magnification, getting you seriously close to smaller subjects for some great, almost macro photography. Whether you're zoomed out or zoomed in, the lens gets you similarly close to your subject. The other good news is that the lens remains sharp straight from f4 at close distances at 70mm, and zoomed into 200mm, it's even a touch sharper again. Great result and lots of fun. Let's see how well the lens performs against bright lights now. Further good news here, whether you're zoomed out or zoomed in, flaring remains low and translucent, and contrast remains high. Let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. Autofocus backgrounds look just averagely soft here, nothing special, but no serious problems either, except for a cat's eye shape to corner highlights that is a little stronger than usual. And finally, let's see about longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f4, it's barely noticeable. At f5.6, it's gone. Overall, Sony have clearly put absolutely everything they've got into this lens, and it's paid off, as this thing is an absolute winner. Compact and lightweight build quality, ridiculously fast and reliable autofocus, stunning image quality, and a fun macro ability. The only optical problem it had was its uncorrected vignetting and distortion, but cameras generally take care of that pretty well nowadays. It's generally incredible in virtually every way. A key issue is the lens's price though. It is expensive. For the same price, it's possible to find an older 70-200mm f2.8 lens and adapt it onto your camera. They won't be quite as sharp or well featured as this new F4 version, but will still be letting in twice as much light and offering backgrounds twice as out of focus, but of course they'll also be big and heavy, and the sheer quality of this new Sony lens is absolutely undeniable, so I'm willing to put its price aside and say it still comes highly recommended. Always nice to test a lens that performs as well as this, even if being able to afford to buy one myself is a bit of a pipe dream. And talking about affordability, I want to say a huge thanks to all my Patreon supporters out there who help make this YouTube channel affordable for me to run. I'm still enjoying testing camera lenses after all this time, but a lot of time and expense goes into it. Patreon supporters get to help out while also being treated to all kinds of bonus content that I make just for them. Check it out in the description below and keep aiming for the stars, everyone.